Okay, we can have conflict with regards to culture when we are not careful. When there are conflict, when it comes to culture, we call that ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism means using one's own standards or culture to try to understand another person's culture. In other words, ethnocentrism means trying to understand another person's culture or value system or belief system based on our own cultural standards, our own traditions. So, is it going to work? When we try to understand another person's culture or belief system using our own culture, is it going to work? Or is it going to cause misunderstanding, conflicts, and so on and so forth? Go figure. And people can become ethnocentric because of prejudice. And here are some famous examples of ethnocentrism. The Nazis killing of Jews, putting them in camps. And we still see that today. People from different cultural religious groups, they don't like one another to the point that they kill one another. People from different parts of the world. And the protests and riots we still see during the summer in different parts of the world, in different parts of the US. These are all different manifestations of ethnocentrism. We can be ethnocentric when we have a belief, whether the belief can be true or not, or the belief is based on our own cultural standings about another group. We can be prejudiced and ethnocentric when we try to understand another person's or another group's culture based on our own culture, our own values, standards, and beliefs. This is what we mean by ethnocentrism. And people can also be ethnocentric because they are xenophobic. Xenophobic means having an irrational fear or hatred of strangers or foreigners, people who look, people who act, people who believe or think differently than them. People can be xenophobic or become xenophobia, have xenophobia thoughts of another groups because they have a certain fear or hatred due to their lack of understanding of another culture, another practice, another tradition, another belief system which is foreign to them. They don't have enough understanding of another person's or group's identity and traditions. So, here are some examples of xenophobic behavior. KKK, anti-blacks movements during the Jim Crow law, internment of Japanese Americans, hatred of immigrants from certain countries, the fear of Muslims after 9/11. These are all different manifestations of xenophobia. Questions so far? Okay, so people can try to strike a consensus among others who have different cultural ideals, practices, traditions, values, and beliefs from them. They can do it through cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the exact opposite of ethnocentrism and xenophobia. People who believe in cultural relativism assume or strongly believe that all cultures are equal. And because of that, they appreciate another person's culture without any prejudice. They try to be neutral about another culture. Examples of being cultural relativistic includes treatment of pets. We don't say, or people don't say that, oh, my culture is more superior. Oh, look at us. We treat pets like a member of our family. We treat them nice. We feed them well. We clothe them during winter. We build shelters for them. Oh, look at the other group. They are savages. Look at how they treat their pets and animals. They put them through hard labor. Oh, they are not good people. If we have this mindset, we are being ethnocentric. We try to understand another person's culture using our own standards and belief. We are not being cultural relativistic. Maybe another group of people, they put their animals to work because they or their country cannot invest in certain technologies in their fields, in their plantations or whatnot. So they had to put their animals to work. And not every country has certain rights to protect animals. And within that culture, we cannot say that they are wrong for treating their animals the way they do. And certain marriage or family practices like first cousin, second cousin marriages. Some cultures are okay, some are not okay. And we cannot say one culture is more right than the other. If we want to be cultural relativistic. How long can children live with their parents? Is vary from culture to culture. There's no right or wrong in this. Polygamy. Some Muslim culture, they still practice polygamy to these days. Not because they are promiscuous. It's part of their tradition. Hundreds of years ago, in many Middle Eastern countries, we know that all these tribal groups in this country, they were constantly at war. When that happens, men are prone to be killed in those tribal clashes, civil wars in the Muslim societies centuries ago. And who was going to take care of all these widowed women? Somebody's sisters or daughters. And because of that, their law permits them to marry up to 4 women just to take care of all these widowed or somebody's daughter or somebody's sister. So, if we have a more open mind stance when we think about cultural relativism, when we think about polygamy, we are being cultural relativistic. And in certain Asian countries, usually even adult children, we live with our parents until we get married. But when we live with our elderly parents, we help pay the bills. We don't live for free. Our parents, if they are still able and they are willing, they may do our laundry, they may cook for us when we come back from work, but we pay the bills. A sibling may take care of the utilities. Another sibling may help with mortgages. Another sibling may contribute to any renovations needs done around the house. Extended family. We cannot say having multi-generational families is right or wrong. Some cultural groups have their own rationale for having extended families. The same thing with polygamy. There were no welfare system back in those societies. Somebody got to take care of the orphans and the widows. That's why they allow 4 women, their law. Certain religious traditions. We cannot laugh at people's religious traditions. If we want to be cultural relativistic, we cannot criticize about baptism, communion services. We cannot laugh at people for dressing red and green during Christmas. That's ethnocentrism. If we laugh at people for doing their religious practices or cultural practices. And the same thing with celebrations. Different cultures have different rationale for having Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, and they do certain things. They get creative with their pumpkins, and we got to respect that. And different cultures have different notions of privacy. It has something to do with the population of that community, that country, that society. We cannot say that somebody from another country is not so good, less well cultured, because they don't have a sense of personal space. They may not have the liberty to have personal space when it's so crowded in certain countries around the world. They may not have the liberty to have privacy. So, privacy is another example of cultural relativism, and people's notion of privacy can vary from place to place, country to country. It's usually affected by the country's political system, economic system, and more so, population density. Burqa, having a headdress. Muslim women do that. We got to respect them. And the reason Muslim women having the burqa or the headdress is because they are being submissive. And we cannot criticize their patriarchy system. We got to understand why Muslim women, they wear a burqa when they go outside the house. Because they want to be respectful to their husbands. So they think that only their immediate male family members can see their face and their hair. Their brothers, siblings, and husbands, fathers, uncles, close uncles. So we cannot criticize them for doing that. Smoking. Different cultures have different opinions about smoking. Some frown upon it, especially in certain cultures that are more health conscious. And in other cultures, they practice machismo. I don't think I said it right. Smoking is a sign of masculinity in certain countries like Indonesia or certain Latin American countries. It's okay for men to smoke, but it's not okay for women to smoke. And corruption can be another manifestation of cultural relativism. We cannot really criticize police officers from another country for taking bribes. We got to understand why they take bribes. Some police officer they barely make enough to live. Or even some low-level government officials in certain countries, they barely make enough to live. There's a saying, I'm sure you heard of it. When you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And these monkeys are not bad people. We cannot even call them monkeys. They may have to take bribes to supplement their incomes. They had no choice. The problem is with the system and the stratification system of that country. For some reason, they pay their high-level officials or other people in other occupations lavishly. They don't pay their low-level civil servants enough. That's why these people are taking bribes. Or in some countries, we know high-level government officials are taking bribes. They may take bribes for a different reason, maybe greed. They want more money. Even though they have plenty, they still want more and more. So they take bribes. And they may take bribes for a very different reason than the low-level officers. Pirate movies and software. Using pirated movies and software. We cannot really criticize people living in certain countries for using pirated movies and software, for watching pirated movies, or for using pirated software. If a graduate student in a third world country, their graduate student stipend barely paid them enough to live. And usually all these software, even things we take for granted, like Microsoft Office, or for grad students, they have certain statistical software, other software to do their assignments, to do their research. And they have no choice but to use pirated software because most of these software are imported from the US mainly. And when you convert the US dollars to their currency, they are not going to afford that. So we cannot really criticize or condemn people in third world countries for using pirated software. And in my humble opinion, they got to be different pricing schemes. If companies want to market their software to other countries, it's just my 2 cents. You don't need to agree. Question so far. Okay. We've been through diffusion before, briefly. It means the transference of material and non-material culture from one group to another. Certain material culture like Coca-Cola, Gap, clothing from Gap, Victoria's Secret. We have that in Asia too. I bet we have that at the most in Latin American countries, in African countries too. This is a manifestation of cultural diffusion or diffusion. And the concept of diffusion is not something new. It happens for a long while. Diffusion can happen because of exploration, conquest, or war, or through missionary activities and immigration. After industrialization happens in Europe in 19th century, we saw that the Europeans with their big ships, they sail to other continents. They look for raw materials for their factories. They look for more market they look to expand the markets for their products from their factories. They had the means through their big boats and ships to sail to other continents. So we can see that they tried to explore other continents, whether they could find raw materials in those places, whether they could expand their products in those places. And sometimes certain European immigrants, they conquered the whole place. They colonized that country within that continent. And sometimes they start a war with the tribal groups of that country. And some European immigrants, they came to another country as missionaries. Like Hudson Taylor. I don't know if you are aware of his biography, Hudson Taylor. Am I saying the name right? He was a missionary to China. He had medical training. I think initially he was a medical assistant, and then he stopped his free clinic in rural China. He and his family went back to England for more training as a surgeon. He eventually became a surgeon. And he went back to reopen the same clinic in, I think, that same area in China. So, in this case, diffusion happens through Hudson Taylor's medical knowledge, Western medicine. And it seems that the Chinese bought that because the way Hudson Taylor tried to mingle among the Chinese, he did not force his culture, his value, his belief upon the Chinese when he set foot on China in the 18th century or 19th century. So people accepted him. And he dressed like them. If you read his biography or if you saw the movie, he dressed like them. He learned the language. He learned their culture. He took time and effort to understand their language and culture, to understand the Chinese medicine and how the Western medicine could complement the Chinese medicine, the traditional Chinese healing practices. And because of that, there weren't any war to fight against Hudson Taylor's endeavors in China. People accepted and respected him for what he did. And some colonial masters in Latin American countries, in Asia, in certain African countries, because maybe they were somewhat eager to introduce their own education system, their own healthcare system, their culture and other beliefs and ideals to the people in that country. They weren't very well received, and sometimes there was civil wars between the Europeans and the natives. So this is another way diffusion happens through war. So diffusion is just the spread of material and non-material culture from one group to another. And diffusion can take place because of communication systems. The printing press before the internet, before social media, telephones, the transportation system, and now social media. And during the civil rights movement, I think the LGBT groups were also fighting for their rights. And in the 60s, those were before the days of the social media, but people from other parts of the world, some could read the newspaper, Some had radios in their homes. They might not have a TV, but many could afford a radio. They heard about what's going on in the US. African Americans and LGBT groups were fighting for their rights. And these ideals, the new cultural values, are being spread from one group to another, one country to another. And they realize that the concept or the value of equality is very important, or the concept, the notion of equal rights are very important in any culture, any group, any country, regardless of their political system. It's important to respect people's rights and to treat people equally. This notion spread. This is another manifestation of diffusion. Questions so far? And diffusion can also happen through all these things. We have all these restaurants in Asia, in other continents, KFC, Shakey's. And diffusion can also happen in another manner. We have Mexican restaurants in the Western country, Chinese restaurants in the Western country, or certain restaurants that sell Greek cuisines, African American cuisines, or African cuisines. So these are all different manifestations of diffusion. And sometimes diffusion can be regarded as a form of cultural domination. And this happens during colonial rule. When the European, they set foot on other continents, they had a mindset, not to offend people here, and I apologize. They had certain mindsets that their education, their healthcare practices, their products, their medical products, their vaccines, material culture. We can think of vaccines, DDT sprays, the spray to kill insects in agricultural fields so that it can increase production. We can picture all these as material culture, their objects. Vaccines, immunizations, medicines, pills. All these are material culture. So the European immigrants, they weren't very careful. Maybe they had a mindset, their education, healthcare, and everything else is better than what the natives in those countries had. So they literally impose their material and non-material culture on the natives. Of course, the natives are not happy. And because of that, there were wars between the natives and the European immigrants. And sometimes the European immigrants, they won because they had better weapons. Because industrialization took place in Europe before other continents. So usually the European, they won. And we can see that as a form of cultural domination. When people have the mindset of a cultural domination, they think that cultures are not created equal. Some cultures are more important, more superior than other cultures. They think that modern institutions, education, healthcare, modern political systems are better than the feudalistic system. Modern economic system, like the capitalistic economic systems, were better than the traditional agrarian system where people don't get paid. They work on their family farms or family fishing enterprises. And they discard or neglect certain ways of life. When they have certain mindset that certain language, certain culture, certain values are more superior than others, they are going to discard or neglect the language, culture, or value they deem as quote unquote inferior or not so good. And food becomes a status symbol when people have the mindset of cultural domination. In certain Asian countries, when KFC, Pizza Hut, other franchisees first opened their stores in Asia, these are all considered high-end cultures, high-end places in Asia. And I did not realize that KFC or pizza places, Taco Bells, are places where students frequent when they had no time cooking. They order from these places. Because I grew up in Malaysia during the 80s and 90s, these are all expensive high-end places in my country. So these are manifestations of cultural domination. And because of that, some people from certain Asian countries, they may neglect certain aspects of their culture. They may drink less tea. They say, oh, Starbucks is way better, or Hard Rock Cafe is way better than my tea. I'm going to drink less tea. And look at how we are dressed right now. I don't think that's a manifestation of cultural domination. Maybe centuries ago, people may be forced to dress in one way or another. But nowadays, we dress essentially like Westerners. We do our hair essentially like Westerners. I think for convenience sake. So the way we dress is a manifestation of diffusion. We don't really wear our traditional costumes in public places. And to many of us, they are more cumbersome. Entertainment. And nowadays, pop music from the West are well received in Asia, and Americans, Europeans, they also like pop stars from Korea and Japan. So these are manifestation of diffusion. And it can also be manifestations of cultural domination. When people in certain countries, they think that their pop stars, the pop stars from the Western countries, are way better than the local musicians. They are going to turn on their TVs, turn on their iPhones and iPads and whatnot to listen to all these pop stars from another country. They think all these artists, pop stars, dancers, performers are way better than their local performers, local musicians, local artists. And some see that as a means of cultural domination through the media. The media gave people a mindset that music, movies, performances, other things from another country are way better than the music, performances from their own country. When people have that mindset, they discard and neglect certain aspects of their own culture. It becomes a form of cultural domination. And we talk about cultural lack. It happens when material culture changes faster than non-material culture. This is the layman's definition for cultural lack, which is different from your book. And because of that, it takes a while for non-material culture to change in order to catch up, to adapt, to adjust to the material culture. One example of cultural lack we see today would be the COVID vaccine. Some say that they make use of aborted fetuses, which is true. I think one of the pharmaceutical companies did acknowledge that they use antibodies from aborted fetus. when they created the drug, they recognized that. And because of that, people from certain religious groups, people with certain value system are going to oppose to the new vaccine. They believe that abortion is bad, is killing of innocent life, the non-material aspects of culture, the belief and the value. Abortion is frowned upon in many belief systems, and abortion is a bad thing in many value systems. And people's belief and values haven't caught up with the vaccine. And cultural lack is not a new thing. It existed centuries ago. When cars first came out, were there any driving laws? Were there any speed limits on the roads? Were there any paved roads? Were there any traffic signs? So, if the answer is no to all these questions, when cars are first released onto the street, wealthier people could afford cars and they drove on the streets. Do you think it was going to be peaceful, or it's going to cause all kinds of chaos in the absence of all these things? People don't know how to react to cars. Nowadays, we take for granted. And another example of cultural lack would be stem cell research or stem cell usage. It can improve people's quality of life, but certain religious tradition, culture, value, and belief system haven't caught up with the invention of the stem cell research. Internet and social media is another example of cultural lack. Certain religious groups, certain cultural groups may have certain ideals, opinions about certain things people see on the internet. And those beliefs, values haven't caught up with this new invention. These are all different manifestations of cultural lack. Are we clear so far? Are we clear so far?
Yes.
Okay, I'm done with this. And okay. Can you see a website I just shared?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So if you read through this, cultural domination or cultural diffusion is being portrayed in Kamala Harris' parents' biography. And Kamala's mother was a PhD. I think she passed away. She has a PhD. But when she was in grad school, she wore saris and sandals, Indian sandals. So people look at her differently. She stood up. And her father, I think he was from a British colony. I think Jamaica, yeah. It was a British colony. And somewhere it says that her father went to schools In Jamaica, that's taught in English. So it's a manifestation of cultural diffusion. Her father was an economics professor. And the British had a different school system in Jamaica. For the Jamaicans they govern, and they pick the brightest students to a certain elite school system in Jamaica to groom them into something. This is a manifestation of cultural domination. They literally made certain people, certain elites in Jamaica believe that the school they went to is better than the school other people from their own group went to, from their own race went to, within the same country, is a manifestation of cultural domination. And her mother was from an elite family in India. And she also had a PhD. And she went to a school, a modern school in India during the British colonial rule. Another form of diffusion and maybe cultural domination. The Brits in India, like the Brits in Jamaica, they let certain Indians from higher castes believe that they get to go to certain elite schools, which are better than the other public schools they built for people from the other castes. This is a manifestation of diffusion, a transference of the British educational system from Britain to India, and cultural domination. And that's the only way I can be fair to you. I won't take roles. I don't know if another two of you had problems logging in or what. So I will mark everybody present to be fair. Because I know some of you had issues with the link. You went to a different link and you took all kinds of hassle. You jumped through all kinds of hoops just to get to this class. So I'm going to mark everybody present today, just to be fair. So I think that's it. Yeah.